Welcome back to Wheatlow Brewery on New Year's Day. And what happens on New Year's Day is we're fed up of it, aren't we? Just fed up of it. All Christmas, all holidays, eating, drinking, beer, even beer, we're fed up of. So what I'm going to brew today is an alcohol-free beer in order to ease back a bit for January. Perhaps should have done it a couple of weeks ago, but never mind. So this alcohol-free beer is based on the one in here, Good Karma Brewing, Good Karma Beer Co. Pale Ale, which is 0.5%. So certainly in the UK that would count as alcohol-free. So I'm using the malt bill from that, but I'm actually going to change the hops completely. So the malt bill is 39% Planet Pale malt from Muntons, 28.7% Munich malt, 10% wheat malt, 9% Cara Munich 1, and a bit of acidulated malt at 7%, and oats 5.8% as well. So it's quite a nice, I don't expect the beer perhaps won't be clear, it'll be a bit hazy. We're going for a water profile similar that we use for Sure Shot, with sort of 1.5-ish times chlorides to sulphates ratio. So pushing the chlorides but still with a decent amount of sulphates to bring the hops out. The changes that we're going to make to the recipe are that we're going to mash hop the beer with Cascade and Challenger to try and get an extra flavours into the beer. And then for the hopping, instead of using Jester, which the original recipe has, we're going to use Challenger in the boil, and then at the end of the boil for a whirlpool, we're going to use Challenger and Fuggles. So for the hops on this beer, we're starting with the mash hop. We're going to have 2.1 IBUs of Challenger and 1.6 IBUs of Cascade in the mash for an hour. And then we're going to start the boil off with Challenger 8.5 IBUs for 60 minutes. Last 10 minutes, 3.7 IBUs of Challenger. And then finally, at flame out, we're going to switch off, and then we're going to add some Challenger 90 grams, 6.8 IBUs, and Fuggles, again, same amount, 90 grams, 4.1 IBUs. So flame out, but start the whirlpool. So at about 90 to 96 it'll probably be for doing that. The mash quite hot, 70 degrees at the moment, but we're going to step that up in a couple of minutes, i.e. after 20 minutes to 72 degrees. Just keep it all hot so that we can leave some unfermentable sugars in the wort, and then transfer the beer. We're going to get half the volume into the kettle. Then we're going to stop sparging. I'm going to top it up with water. So we're looking for a post-boil gravity, or an OG, of 1022 by the time we're finished. When we're brewing alcohol-free beer, we need to be very aware of safety. There's a very interesting podcast if you want to learn a little bit more about this. The Modern Brewer podcast, which is more for pro brewers, episode 43. Where they interviewed Dr. Zagorsh Rakon, who's a scientist doing research on non-alcoholic beer safety. But the upshot of that is two things: that the beer needs to have a pH below 4.5, and it also needs to be carbonated. You also have to be quite careful about draft lines in terms of cleaning them minimum once a week properly. Or package it into cans. So as long as the beer has a pH in the low 4s and it's fizzy, then you should be safe with brewing your own alcohol-free beer at home. Obviously, alcohol is important for killing nasty things. So with no alcohol, we just have to take extra care. So the acidity is important, and for some reason the carbonation is important. But if you listen to that podcast, the Modern Brewer podcast, episode 43. I'll put a link in the description as well. Then you can get all the details on that to make sure that you're on the right track. We're then going to ferment the beer using WHC sweet release. At the moment, this is a collector's item because it's very hard to get hold of because they've stopped it. I'm hoping that perhaps by doing these various recipes and the home brewers actually asking for the yeast, that they will bring it back, because it is a unique yeast in that it's both thiolizing, hence the mash hopping, and it's also maltotriose negative, which means it doesn't munch away at all the sugars, and therefore it's very useful for making low alcohol beers with a decent bit of body in them. So that's the yeast we're using today, sweet release, and I hope that WHC will bring that back at some stage so that we can all use it going forwards. Now, I've already mashed in at 70 degrees. My alarm's just gone off actually for 20 minutes, which means that I now have to step up the temperature to 72. So I'll adjust it on here. And it's already circulating in here, so that will now step the temperature up to 72. I'll just give it a stir, and I can smell the hops in here. It's amazing. And of course the other thing that's interesting, if you want to have a look, that it's virtually empty. Obviously low alcohol beer, there's not much grain needed, so whereas normally for a sort of average 5-ish% beer, I'd use a whole sack of malt, 25 kilos. I've used 5 kilos of pale malt, and then probably 5 altogether of all the others. So it's a low malt bill, and we're only going to run half into the kettle and then water it down as well. So it'd be very interesting to see what this beer's like. It'd be, when you buy an alcoholic beer in the supermarket or what have you, you're never quite sure how it's an alcohol-free beer, but there are breweries, good breweries, making good alcohol-free beers, and they're brewing them with no interference, if you like, and that's exactly what we intend to do today. Going to brew it properly with malt and hops and yeast, but we're only going to ferment it to 0.5% alcohol. So definitely breaking new ground today here at Wheatlow Brewery, partly because I've never done alcohol-free before, partly because I don't know if it'll work. It's only the second or third time I've done mash hopping, and it would just be amazing to see if we can produce a beer that is alcohol-free, if we get the numbers right, that's safe but get the acidity right, and also that tastes nice and can make a refreshing alternative in the dark days of January when we're all a bit grumps about alcohol. So yeah, looking forward to this today. It's a nice change, and yeah, we'll carry on with the mash. In terms of the hopping and IBUs, the original recipe in the book is about 25 IBUs. Doesn't sound a lot, but when it's a low alcohol beer, the balance between, if you like, the Bugu, which is original gravity of 1022, so it's a Bugu of 1, which is what you might think of as a hoppy beer, and I'm pushing it up a little bit more to nearly 27 IBUs because I just generally like hops. But you do have to be careful, I think, with an alcohol-free or a low ABV beer of overdoing the hops, because you haven't got enough balance in malt to balance it in the same way as you would have in a stronger beer. So that's what we're going to go for, about 27 IBUs. Cascade is a really great hop for mash hopping. So we're going to use equal parts Cascade and Challenger. So just 63 grams of each. So get them in the mash now. The mash temperature, we keep circulating it and heating it when necessary to keep it at 72. Try and keep it at that top end to make sure we don't get too much fermentable sugars converted. We're keeping an eye on the pH. At the moment it's 4.9, sorry. We have a target of 4.7 by the end of the boil and 4.5 by the end of the fermentation. So we're probably on track, but certainly we'll make sure it's right before we put it in the fermenter, and then when the fermentation's finished we'll check it again, of course, make sure that it's 4.5 or under before we package the beer. Right, mash is finished, heated it up to 75. We're transferring it now into the kettle, and we're sparging as well, but what we're going to do is stop at halfway, which in our case would be about 70 litres, and then we're going to top it up with just RO water, and then we'll add the second addition of water salts. So all that should lead to an OG of a 1022. So let's see if that works out. Right, we've got 70 litres of water now in the kettle, and I've just checked the gravity, 1036. So I'm going to be a bit careful, I think, and add 40 litres, which should give me 1022, and then that allows a little bit for the boil off, because the original gravity actually that we're aiming for is 1025, and the final gravity is 1022. So I'm going to top it up with water now. pH is 5, by the way, at the moment. Right, it's just coming to the boil now, so I'm going to stick in first edition of Challenger. Right, I'm just recirculating the hot water through the heat exchanger just to sterilise it, and I'm going to check the gravity and I'm going to check the pH, make sure we're on track. Probably will have to acidify it a little bit. Remember, we're aiming for 4.7 or less at the end of the boil and 4.5 or less at the end of fermentation. So I'll check that now, check the strength, and we may have to water it down to get the 1025 as well. So the pH is 5, and I've worked out that I need a small addition of 15.8 ml of lactic. So I'll stick that in now, and we'll see if that's done the trick. Right, so gravity's pretty close, it's 1026. I want 1025. I'm going to add 4 litres of RO water. So that should give us the right gravity, and the pH is just cooling down, but looks like I'll have to adjust it a little bit. So that's pretty good, isn't it? 1025, exactly where we want it to be, although we are a bit low on volume, but never mind. Better to be at the right gravity, especially when it's the first time I've done this kind of beer. And anyway, how much alcohol-free beer do we really want? So these are the Whirlpool hops, 90 grams Challenger, 90 grams Fuggles. So we'll get them in now. pH coming in 4.8. Normally if it was 1 point out I wouldn't bother, but because we're being strict on this one, I've just got a touch more, 5 ml more acid to go in. So take a new sample now and just double check that. 4.7, I'm happy with that. By the way, all this acidification, it doesn't mean that the beer is actually any more acidic than an alcoholic beer. What it means is that we're giving it a little bit of a hand, because the fermentation, the activity of the yeast in a beer does help to reduce the pH. So typically when you've got a normal beer, you'd probably knock it into the fermenter a pH of about 5. But during fermentation, it would probably go down to about 4.5. So we're just starting a touch lower at 4.7, and the little bit of fermentation that we're going to have should get it down to 4.5. So the end result is the same level of acidity. Right, so beer's in the fermenter. All we've got to do now is put the sweet release yeast in. Let's have a peer in there. Just under 100 litres we managed to get. So perhaps could have sparged a bit more and got more volume, but I think 100 litres of alcohol-free beer might last us a bit. So we'll get this yeast in. So I think the Brewday's gone pretty well. I will check the gravity and pH now it's in the fermentation tank, just to be sure. But I think we can tuck that up, and I really don't know quite what to expect about how 0.5% of attenuation or half percent of alcohol's worth of attenuation is going to look like in terms of time scale. But we'll set it at 20 degrees and see how we get on. Right, the alcohol-free beer has finished fermenting, and I've cooled it down and I've filled a keg with it. And there's two things that are interesting. The first is that instead of attenuating to 1020, it's gone down to 1015. And this means that it's actually 1.2% instead of 0.5%. It doesn't matter to me, does it, as a home brewer? And I can put that on the label or what have you, and it's still a low alcohol beer. But it's a bit disappointing to not achieve what we set out to do, which is to create a 0.5% or below beer. So is that because I didn't mash it hot enough? I did stick to the mash schedule, which was, I think, 70 degrees for 20 minutes and then 72 for 40 minutes. Is the yeast more attenuative than it should be? Shouldn't be, really. It's that sweet release, which is multi-trios negative. And let us know in the comments if you've got an idea about how we could have done better on this, sticking to the small attenuation just from 1025 to 1020. Or is it a case of you have to cool it down when you've got to 1020 and then stop or kill the yeast later to just stop it carrying on? Answers in the comments, please. Anyway, we've kegged it, and it's quite nice. It's got a lovely subtle hoppy taste. It's quite drinkable. You could be forgiven for thinking that it's not alcohol free, but once you know it is, you think, oh yeah, it is a bit thin at the end, that sort of thing. But we have got a fault with it, and that fault is that it's got a sulphury aroma to the beer. Now, a couple of videos ago when we were doing Ward's Bitter and before that Bass, I was scratching my head trying to think of ways to keep or get the sulphur into the beer because of the egginess that you used to get with those beers, to try and keep it authentic. So I read quite a lot about sulphur, and one of the things that I did read and managed to retain in my memory was that if you want to get rid of sulphur, that you can do a number of things, and one of them is have open fermentation or no pressure to let the gas escape. Another is purge the headspace above the fermenter or the keg to dissipate the sulphur. Another little tip that I read was about using copper. And apparently, if you expose beer to copper, even for a moment, all the sulfates and sulfide ions flock to presumably create copper sulfate and stick to the copper. Something like that anyway. I don't claim to know all the scientific details. So I want to know if sticking a bit of copper into this beer will get rid of that sulphury smell. So I've poured 2, and I've had a piece of copper piping, which was very grubby when I found it in the shed. But I've cleaned it up nicely by soaking it in sanitizer overnight, and I've just rinsed it off. And I'm going to see if this actually makes a difference. So all I'm going to do is stick it in. Copper, of course, is safe for brewing. It's been used in kettles, in brewery equipment for years. And in fact, sometimes we call the boiler the copper, and copper findings and things like that. So has sticking a pipe of copper, a piece of copper in, changed the sulfates or sulfides on this beer? I mean, they've totally gone. So I can still taste them in that one. And actually, I can still smell them a bit on that one. Maybe it's in the head, but I can't taste them. So, dare I stick this old piece of pipe into my keg and into the fermenter where the remnants of the beer are, because I didn't have enough kegs, to just kill that sulphur off? Well, on the evidence of that, I think, yes, it's going to work and it won't do any harm as long as we just keep the oxygen out. So I'm going to try that, and then I think this beer will be ready to serve to people, because the sulphury smell before, and that's gone now actually. The sulphury smell in particular is a bit off-putting to people. So I'm going to try that now. Right, so that's the copper stuck in the fermenter. I'll just purge the headspace just in case any oxygen got in there, and then hopefully that will also purge out any sulphur in the headspace as well. So all I need to do now is get some kegs emptied so I can keg the rest. Right, so I've canned a few cans my alcohol-free beer, and even though I know that it's carbonated and the pH is 4.3 and therefore it should be safe, as an extra precaution and as an interesting exercise in learning a new technique, I'm going to pasteurize these cans. So pasteurisation is something that is common practice in commercial breweries to make shelf life of the beer longer. And pasteurisation is a way of reducing the microbial activity, or slowing it down, or killing so many of the bugs in the beer, but it's not sterilisation. So that's why your pasteurised milk can go off, even if it's sealed, because it's not completely sterilised, but it does make it last a lot longer. So The idea being, of course, that yes, you can boil it, completely sterilize it, but then you're going to alter the taste of it. So pasteurisation is much more gentle and at a lower temperature, invented, of course, by Louis Pasteur. So in order to pasteurize beer cans, then there's quite a science behind it that I don't pretend to know everything about. This is the first time I've done it. I've looked this stuff up. If you want to do this at home, I recommend you independently verify and do your own research. But what I've learned is that you can calculate how pasteurized a liquid is or a beer is in a scale called pasteurization units. Now, to put that very simply, if you keep this liquid inside the can at 60 degrees for 1 minute, that is 1 pasteurization unit. But there's a formula that actually enables you to calculate what effect on the pasteurization units it has, having it held at so many minutes at any temperature between 50 and normally 74 is normally the maximum temperature that you'd pasteurize things at. So I'm going to do these gently. So the two methods that commonly used in commercial brewing are you put your cans in a bath or a tunnel pasteurizing machine and keep it at 60 degrees for however many minutes you determine your beer needs, or the other is that you heat it up to 74 and then cool it quickly and have it hot for a shorter length of time. So I'm going for the gentle approach. I'm going to go for around 60 degrees. Now, how many pasteurization units do you need? Well, according to the Fermentis yeast website, which has got some really useful information on there actually about low alcohol beers, because they've been doing some low alcohol yeasts, that they recommend for a low alcohol or an alcohol-free beer, you should be getting at least 50 pasteurization units and ideally 60. For an alcoholic beer, if you pasteurize it, you wouldn't need to go that high, possibly 15 to 20 units. So what I'm going to do is I've put 24, 30 maybe cans of beer in the mash tun, and I'm going to submerge them in water, or at least up to say there, to about the fill level. And I'm going to put warm water in, and I'm going to keep that water at let's say 64 degrees to start with, and the aim of getting the cans up to 60 degrees. And then I'm going to record the data about the time and temperature and calculate the pasteurization units in a spreadsheet. And I've kept a couple of cans out I'm not going to pasteurize, so I can do a taste test later. So once we've finished the pasteurization, we'll have to cool them as quick as we can with cold water. So going to be a really interesting experiment to see how this works. We've got to be careful. If the cans are overfilled, which they may well be because it wasn't very frothy when I was canning it, they may well either sort of swell up or even burst. So when I put the heat on, I'll shut the lid and I'll get some safety glasses on as well. So let's get some water on these cans and get the show on the road. So in order to monitor the temperature, I've got here a can of water, which I've marked with this red tape. So I'm going to open that. I'm going to stick a meat thermometer in it, and I'm going to put it at the far side here where hopefully it won't get splashed, and I can monitor the temperature of that can, and that should give me an idea of the temperature inside each can. So at the moment it's at 12 degrees, and as soon as we get to 50 we'll start recording data. Okay, so it's already going up nicely, 21 degrees, look. Right, so it's hit 50 degrees. So I'm going to start a timer. And start recording the data. Right, so the temperature has now reached 60 inside the cans. So I've turned the water bath thermostat down from 64 to 60 now, just 60.5, just to keep it constant. And I'll still log in the data, because if it just creeps up to 61, 62, it'll do the job faster. Right, we've been in at 60 for over half an hour now, plus all the ramp temperatures, and we've calculated that the PU pasteurisation units is 52 point something now. So it's over the 50 minimum that we need for this beer. I don't think we need to push it much further. So I can begin now the process of cooling it down. So turn off. So I can turn off the recirculation and empty the hot water. The cans feel really firm, but they don't seem to have swollen up. But we do need to cool them as soon as we can. So just emptying the hot water now and start adding cold. So since we've been talking, since we've been cooling, the water hasn't got over the cans yet. We've had another 3 minutes at 59, so I'm going to put that into the spreadsheet. Right, so just 2 or 3 minutes later, and it's 17 degrees now inside the cans, so I reckon that's job done. We'll let it go a little bit further, may as well. They still feel a bit firm. I guess they need to reabsorb the CO2. So I'll get them in the fridge as soon as possible. Right, so this is the spreadsheet that I've knocked up, and in this column you've got time, minutes at this temperature. So we had half a minute at 50 degrees, and then I've put the formula in there. It gives half a minute at 50 degrees equals 0.018 pasteurisation units, and it's hardly obviously worth bothering with, but as you get up 31 units coming there from 31 minutes at 60 degrees. Anyway, the total is here 57 pasteurisation units. So when we were aiming for a minimum of 50 and recommended of 60, I think that's okay for what we're doing for these few cans that'll be drunk quickly. So it's been an interesting exercise. I'll get these in the fridge and I'll mark up my control cans so that we can taste side by side to just see if it's affected the taste by much. It seems a similar process to a forced diacetyl test, so I'm not looking forward to that in a way, because I didn't do a diacetyl rest because it was already fermented too much, so I wanted to cool the beer down as quickly as possible. So that may be something that we can improve on in the future. Right, Ralph, I've got here a brand new beer for you to taste, and just wondered if you could taste it and tell me what you think.
Very light, creamy head. Just trying to think what flavours there are in.
It is very light, isn't it? Well,
Very
what?
Session ale.
Definitely sessionable. This is my attempt at alcohol-free.
Is it?
Yeah. No, it hasn't quite hit the numbers, so it's come out at 1.2% instead of 0.5.
Hence why it's quite light then.
But it's got a lovely thin head on it, isn't it?
It is got a very frothing head. And yeah, having just tried a pint of direct,
Should have got you before you.
Yeah, you should have had that beforehand, and I'd have been probably quite happy with that.
You could drink that though, couldn't you, if you went out and you were driving or whatever?
Definitely, yeah. And as you say, you wouldn't mind, especially on a hot summer's day. That's thirst quenching, isn't it?
I've accidentally drank all mine. Anyway, just thought I'd let you try that. Cheers.
Thank you.
Right, Ben, I've got a bit of a different beer for you to taste now.
Okay.
What do you think of that?
Nice, isn't it?
That is my attempt at an alcohol-free beer.
Which is?
It's it hasn't quite got to 0.5. It's 1.2.
Considering the alcohol volume, it's really not.
You could go to a pub and have a few of them, couldn't you, and enjoy them?
Oh yeah, couldn't you just?
What do you think of the mouthfeel from the head, creamy head?
It reminds me of drinking a Guinness a little bit.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I've actually done a nitro pour like you do with the Guinness, so that's why.
With my limited beer knowledge.
Well, you drink enough of it, you should know a bit about it.
It all just tastes. Everything just tastes nicer, doesn't it?
Froth. Here I've got the draft beer, alcohol-free poured, and it's called nearly alcohol-free because didn't quite make it. 1.2%. It is hazy. That's what I expected. It's got oats in it, and it looks actually quite a lovely colour. And we've poured it through. We've nitrogenated it and we poured it through the Guinness spout, the nitrogen pour tap. So it's got a nice, creamy, fine bubbled nitrogen pour head, and I'm hoping that just add a little bit to the mouthfeel and so on. That sulphury smell's gone. Pleased about that. Quality almost to it, and a little bit delicate hopping. When we taste it, the smooth head definitely convinces you that it's a beer, obviously. It is light-bodied, and once you know it's alcohol-free, or nearly alcohol-free, you sort of think, oh yeah, it does sort of fade away a bit at the end, as alcohol-free beers do. But it tastes like a very soft, hazy pale ale, not like a NEPA style. It's not ultra hoppy. This is just like a balanced pale ale kind of a taste. It's quite smooth and easy drinking. The hop, we could probably have upped the hop a little bit to give this beer a little bit more oomph, but it's actually quite delicate and subtle and smooth, and it makes it quite nice and moreish. So I'm really quite pleased with it as a first attempt. Now there are issues about safety with alcohol-free beer. Why? Well, because when we brew beer, we're protected by several defense mechanisms against nasty bacteria and things, things that can grow in the background in food and drink that can be very dangerous to humans, like E. coli, for example. And there are a number of protections that beer naturally has that help to make that very low risk with alcoholic beer, if not impossible. So those protections are, you've got a low pH. Beer always has a pH of usually a 4 point something, so it's a relatively acidic drink. Normally carbonation also helps. Lack of oxygen in the product that enables these things to grow, and also hops release some preservative qualities that the bacteria don't like. And the other thing about a beer that's packaged and finished is that it's generally low in sugar because the sugars that were available have been fermented out. Now, and the other protection, of course, is the alcohol itself in beer, which again makes these baddies feel uncomfortable. So when you do a no alcohol beer or a low alcohol beer, you lose a couple of those protections. One You change it from being a very low nutrient environment to perhaps a slightly higher nutrient environment because there are some more residual sugars in the alcohol-free beer that there wouldn't be in a fully fermented beer. And secondly, you're losing the protection of the alcohol. So this means that we have to be really careful about making sure that the other things are bang on. I recommend that you verify what I'm saying with other research, because I'm not an expert on all this. This is just me doing my first homebrew attempt at alcohol-free beer. And in particular, the Modern Brewer podcast, episode 43, where there's a very detailed interview with a scientist, Dr. Greg, and he says two things: that the beer should be carbonated and the pH should be as low as possible, certainly below 4.5. So we've been careful to check that on these beers, that the pH is 4.3, and of course they're carbonated as well, because even mixed gas does have CO2 in it as well. And we've taken the extra precaution of pasteurising, and we've gone through and checked that we've achieved pasteurisation units over 50. Now, how has that affected the beer? Have we been successful in terms of not ruining the taste? So let's check that. So I've got here a non-pasteurised control can and a pasteurised one. And it'd be just interesting to see how the pasteurised can tastes and whether or how much pasteurisation has affected it. What amazes me is that it's still fizzy, because if you warmed up a beer to 60 degrees, you wouldn't expect it to be fizzy, but of course it's all sealed in the can. So there are the two. So I think they look pretty similar, don't they? Well, straight away there is a different smell. And I know what that is. That's diacetyl in the pasteurised beer, and that's what I was afraid of, which I can't really taste in the unpasteurised beer. So it smells like sort of sweet, buttery popcorn. Now, some people hate that, actually. I don't find it that unpleasant, but it's definitely different. Now, I think I said earlier, I was afraid that might happen with heating the beer up, but this is something that we can prevent. Normally, you'd raise the fermented beer up a couple of degrees, what's called a diacetyl rest, let the yeast absorb the diacetyl. In this case, with a low alcohol beer, when you want to stop fermentation, you can't do that. So, because the fermentation will carry on. So what we need to do is use a DLC, alpha-acetolactate decarboxylase enzyme, to stop the formation of diacetyl. So I think I've learnt a couple of lessons from this brewing experiment. Firstly, I've learnt that if you're going to do a low alcohol or an alcohol-free beer, use ALDC to stop the diacetyl. Secondly, to keep a very close eye on the gravity and stop the fermentation when you get to the 0.5. Again, particularly if you're pasteurising, which you probably would have to. So the two ways I can think of stopping the fermentation when you get to the gravity that you want are to cool it to as cold as possible. That will stop the fermentation dead. And the other way would be to, I suppose, put a Camden tablet in or something like that to kill the yeast. Another way, of course, is pasteurisation. And actually, if you cool it, you put it in a can, and then it goes into, or a bottle, and then it goes to room temperature, it could well ferment to an extent that you wouldn't want, so which could cause exploding cans and bottles. So until you've dialed in your technique for just getting to 0.5 and it's stopping on its own, I think you probably might have to arrest the fermentation. So the draft version, very, very pleased with. The pasteurised version, I'm very pleased that I've learned the technique, but we made the mistake there with the diacetyl, and the control can is just as good as the draft. So it's been a very interesting learning experience for me doing this beer. If you want to try an alcohol-free beer, have a go, but go in with your eyes wide open, do your research, be careful about the safety. So I think that's been a really interesting brewing experience for me. And of course, January is the time to do it, isn't it, to have an alcohol-free beer. It's actually really quite enjoyable. Be quite happy on that. Not quite as happy as a real beer, obviously, but I'm pretty pleased with it. And you can get lots of nice alcohol-free beers from craft breweries now, can't you? That taste interesting and different, and have something about them. The days of the Beck's Blue and or even worse, things like Caliber are no longer. You've got a much better choice now. So interesting experience, and don't worry, next week we'll be back on alcoholic beer when we look into a Japanese rice lager. So looking forward to that, and we'll see you next week for some more frothing ale. Cheers.